Welcome to this edition of Online for Authors. My guest today is Tony Stewart, who wrote the memoir, Carrying the Tiger. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks, Carole. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. This memoir has some very intimate moments, as well as some courageous decisions that you guys made. What made you guys decide to make this journey public by writing this memoir?
It's interesting. It's a core question. We didn't know that what we were doing was going to become a public memoir. This Carrying the Tiger began as a series of posts that we put on. There's a website called caringbridge.org. That's a nonprofit organization. It's for people who are facing health challenges. And you can set up like a private Facebook, simple social media kind of thing, but you can restrict it to your friends. And so we started within days. Lynn was diagnosed with incurable lung cancer. That's the start of the story. Within days, we were overwhelmed with the need to write emails. She had a lot of friends trying to write emails to our friends and tell them what was going on, and they asked questions, and it was driving us nuts. And someone told us, why don't you start posting on Caring Bridge, where you can write a post once, and then we, your friends, can all log in and read it and respond. They can write little comments and click the heart logo and things like that.
That was
so
great. Yeah.
It all started simply to keep our friends informed about what was going on with Lynn and her cancer. And by a twist, she was happy to be open with her friends, but she, who was living with the death sentence, with the emotional impact of this, asked me to write the posts. She would look over my shoulder and she might make some edits and say, yes, that's okay, you can publish that. But I ended up journaling for years.
Yeah, it went on for years. Yes.
It went on for years. We were incredibly lucky early on. Most people who have stage 4 lung cancer do not get to live very long.
Right. Yes.
Some of the twists and turns, the first part of the book, which is about learning to live with her cancer, she got into a clinical trial of a miracle drug, and it did not cure the cancer, but it held it down for years, which gave us this extra time of learning to share and enjoy and appreciate the world, and also a whole lot of health issues. And then,
I understand that. I understand that she was a still life artist who exhibited her work in New York, and she had a studio that she loved to work in. Tell us a little bit about her passion for that work of hers.
Oh, painting was what Lynn lived for, and in fact was what kept her going throughout the years as the cancer slowly took away her physical abilities. Lynn was a still life painter, which was a very out of fashion discipline during all the years she was doing it. And she just lived to make those paintings. She was modestly successful. She had a gallery, she had shows, but we couldn't by any means live on that income. She did it for herself. And as the years went on and the cancer was taking away so many of our other things that we used to be able to do, the one thing that she had, the one thing that drove her, was that she could get up and go to her studio and make paintings.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I don't know how many of your audience will see this on video as opposed to listening to it, but if you're watching on video, I've got several of her paintings over my shoulder. Those are hers in the background on the far wall of my office.
Oh, wow. That's great. I know that after she suffered for several months from what many of us would suffer from, indigestion and diarrhea. She went through loads and loads of tests until they did find something in her spine. Before I go any further, we have to let the audience know that this is Lily. This was her cat.
This was her cat. For those who can see it, my little gray tabby, who was very much Lynn's cat, has been walking all over me through this part of our conversation, twitching her tail and not settling down.
She's doing that.
We'll see how much she participates in this.
I know. But eventually, after all the tests that they had done, they did find something in her spine.
Yes.
And that's when she learned she had this incurable cancer, and this journey began. I know that you went to many different hospitals, treatment centers. Tell us a little bit about how that manifested through the years with all that help.
Well, in the book, the whole first 50 pages of the book is about how the heck we found our way through the thicket of try this, try that, try this doctor, try the other doctor. And so it takes up a large part of the beginning of the story, but in life, that was only a couple of months. And so and then she lived for 5 more years. So those months were unbelievably intense and scary. And we just didn't know. We would get up each day and say, okay, this is what we have to do today. And we'd get some information and say, what are we going to do with this information? And we reached out to friends and had some very good luck. We went up to New Haven to a hospital there because of a friend who suggested we check out something there. And they told us about a clinical trial, which oddly enough, if we wanted to do it with them, we were going to have to go there for the next few years. Every week, we couldn't do that. But we found, without their help, we found that it was also available in New York. And then we settled in at this world-famous cancer center that we have here, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And that is where Lynn was treated for the next 5 years. The problem was that the cancer, which was lung cancer, had attacked her spine. It was already metastasized. That's how we even discovered it, was pain in her back. So it's as they said, the horse is out of the barn. The cancer's all over your body now. They were just trying to hold it down. But that spinal issue, that was the gift that kept on giving. And so over the next few years, there were multiple breakdowns there and hospitalizations and all to deal with that. And that's the medical part of the beginning of the story. Right. I would say that if it were only that, no one would ever want to read this book. The book is also very much about what it felt like for us and how we managed to live and cope and keep going forward and find bits of happiness in between this very difficult stuff.
It was tough. It was sad. It was happy. I mean, it was, you just keep reading thinking, how are they going to do this next? And, is she going to be there in the morning? And it was an amazing book. Even after years of surgery, and she even had experimental drugs, I believe. Yes. She still had hope that something would be discovered that would cure her cancer. When do you think she accepted the inevitable? Because even toward the end, there was still, and as I read, it looked like there was still some hope there.
I would just like to shade one thing you said. We never believed that something would be discovered that would cure the cancer. That was always possible. But I strongly believe that when you're living with stage 4 cancer and all the top experts say, we got nothing that's going to cure this, what they were offering and what we lived trying to get was more good life. Could we find drugs or treatments that would give us more time? More time where she wasn't like lying in a bed with a ventilator or something like that. More time where she could paint. More time where we could be together even if we could no longer travel. That's what the hope was, that we could get more time.
Right. And she did get enough time to go back to that studio periodically.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
She had two shows, 2 gallery shows during the 6 years.
That's amazing.
Her paintings got smaller. It's funny, again, those who can see over my shoulder, the one that's closest to my head is quite small. And she was more and more doing quick, small paintings because she really felt like, I don't have time to do a big painting that's going to take me a month. I want to do small paintings. I want to do things where I can go and make a painting, and in a few days, I've got a painting. And she managed to do 2 shows that way in between all of this other stuff happening to her.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
But
Go ahead.
you asked the question of when did we stop, or how did she? At the end of a long period, the drugs stopped working. The tumors were growing. Her spine was breaking down. It was very terrible 4 or 5 months as her body
painful.
was breaking
Yeah.
down. Very painful. We tried another experimental drug. One night we came back with, just from the hospital, from days tests and things, not a hospital stay. We came back and we just got this news that basically the cancer is all over your body, all over your spine. And the surgeons, and I should say there's different personalities. Lynn had surgeons, and the surgeon personality is to try to, quote, fix you. And we had her oncologist, who's medical, not a surgeon, who we've been with for years, whose goal was to give us more time. And in the course of just 15 minutes, first the surgery department called to say, all this horrible stuff is showing on your scans. We really want you to come back tomorrow and start a course of radiation to slow it down. It's going into your head. We need to start radiating your head. And even waiting one more day will be too late. And Lynn was just hated the idea. She was so tired. And then our oncologist called and said, I'm looking at your scans. The cancer is all over your body. Sometimes you have to say enough is enough, and this might be that time. And he gave us permission to stop. It was still a little hard. And I, to my eternal dismay in hindsight, tried to talk Lynn into getting a little more radiation because I didn't want to lose her. But Lynn was ready and basically said, I'm not going back to the hospital.
Yeah, she said it. I remember she said that. I was really encouraged by all of the things that kept her spirit up on that webpage that, on Caring Bridge. So you started to tell us a little before about she would sort of dictate and you would write the posts, and then you would sit at that table in the kitchen and look outside, and then you would read her the posts that came back. That sometimes it would take quite a long time to get through all of those posts because she had an amazing following.
She did. I think when we started, there were 30 or 40 friends who signed up in the first few weeks, but by the time she died, there were 200 people reading the posts, people she had worked with at her job a few years earlier, cousins and other people who had known her but weren't part of our tight inner circle when we started, who over those years learned about her situation and said, I want to read these posts. I want to be with you. And it was fantastic for us. Fantastic. Because we got this support. It was having a support community, support group, both emotional support, just I'm with you, the sense that you have these people who are with you all the time and encouraging you, and also quite a lot of really good practical advice, because they would write in comments, we're talking about Lynn is trying to decide whether to have some procedure, and someone would write in saying, well, my father had that procedure last year and here's what happened to him. Or these drugs you're talking about, I'm taking that one and here's how it's working for me. So it was amazing that we had this combination of the emotional support and also a lot of practical support.
Yeah, it was kind of like a nightly support group session.
Yes.
That went on for hours.
Yes. And here's what I find most interesting, and without it, there would be no Carrying the Tiger. As we got further along, closer to when Lynn died, she could no longer help me write the posts. The last few weeks of her life in hospice, she was basically slowly fading away, lying on her back. We did home hospice. Right. I'm in actually the room that's right over my shoulder through the wall there. But I couldn't stop writing. And I kept writing those posts. And in the absence, we weren't going to doctor's appointments. I started writing about the minutia of what it felt like from day to day, what it was like emotionally for me, what amazing things Lynn had said to me in the last weeks of her life. And as I said, how it felt like for me. And so this thing became not just a factual record, but it had morphed into an emotional record. And I had never kept a journal before. And I certainly wasn't out there. I'm a reasonably traditional guy. I'm not out there broadcasting my feelings normally. But this trained me to do that because I was getting all these responses saying, thank you so much for sharing what's really going on. And those responses and those posts eventually, several years later, led me to create Carrying the Tiger out of all of that material.
So you recommend that to someone going through this? Is there something special that you have to be able to deal with this? Or, how do you answer someone who's newly been diagnosed and they want to know, was it worth it? Do you think there were times that you would not have done it again? Or,
well, if what we're talking about is the communicating, the writing posts, I wholeheartedly recommend. Not everyone is a writer. I mean, it turns out I was a natural writer. I haven't written a book before, but I've done a lot of writing in my career.
Right.
But I wholeheartedly recommend being open with as many of your friends as possible, much more than society conventionally tells us, because the rewards that we got back from this thing gave us so much strength and courage and encouragement, as well as the practical advice. And you just don't know. I didn't know some of these people who were saying the most wonderful things to us. And to me later, after Lynn died, I kept writing and I chronicled my grief. And people who had lost close ones were talking to me about what their grief had felt like. And it helped me immensely. So at every stage of this journey, people among Lynn's many friends and my friends who had been down this road before in their own lives were telling me things I never would have thought to ask them for these things. I wouldn't have known. They were sharing information about their personal lives that I had never known, but they were doing it out of their generosity and love for us and to help us on our journey. This was fantastic. Yeah. So I do think that if you're able to write, if writing comes comfortably to you, writing is a terrific thing because you process your own thoughts. I mean, we're on a writer's podcast here. We're talking about writing all the time.
Exactly.
But in general, being open as opposed to secretive. Oh, I've got cancer. I don't want to tell my friends. Being open brought us unbelievable rewards.
Yeah, that did. One of the things that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were not with her when she passed. Am I right?
By a matter of seconds.
In a matter of seconds.
We're talking, I was with her on the bed. I was actually on a phone call with my sister on speakerphone, talking about our childhoods. And it was clear that Lynn was pretty close to the end, but I didn't have the expertise to know, oh my gosh, this is going to be it.
Right.
And I got up and took the dishes into the kitchen and put them down. And it was I was away for about a minute. And it was the longest I'd been apart from her in several hours. And I suddenly thought, I want to check on Lynn. And I went back into the bedroom. And
but you have a theory about that, don't you?
Yes, I do. And I think that she didn't want to go while I was right next to her, that would be painful for her and painful for me. Now, I know the science. I understand the science will tell us that last day of her life, she wasn't there in a conscious sense. She was really close to dying. She was fading away. We don't know where her brain was. But I also know my experience that that's what it felt like to me. And I'll stand by that. And when I wrote about that in Caring Bridge, and I said, I've heard about this. I think perhaps it's an old wives' tale. 3 different friends came in with comments saying, nope, that's exactly what happened to me or to my mother or whatever. As soon as the room was empty, not while the people were there, but as soon as the room was empty for a minute, they let go.
It's amazing. Well, I know if people are watching and listening and they're looking for more information about this particular book, you can head over to Facebook and log on to Novels and Latte, and you might even be lucky enough to win a copy of this book. But at any rate, this book doesn't end with Lynn's passing.
No.
You write about seeking some happiness as you were going through the grief. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there's two aspects to that, both of which I think are important. The one which is common to everyone, I fell into deep, shattering grief, absolutely horrible grief, which lasted for months and months and months. And that's extremely common. And I wrote in the book about what it was like to search for a kind of happiness, how I was trying to climb out of this, and the various ways in which it totally didn't work. And then, because grief is something that you have to live through at whatever speed it's going to be for you, and there are no major magic bullet type shortcuts. But I did actually consciously try to do things like look at photos of Lynn that were making me cry and try to remember the happy moment that had caused us to take that photo, which was incredibly difficult. But over time, I started to change my feeling about her and about the photos, and that worked. And there were other things that I thought about and wrote about. But meanwhile, the other thing that happened, which is rather unusual, is when she was about to die, Lynn gave me permission to have another girlfriend. I just want to put this right out there. We talked about it, but we both thought we were talking about years from now. In fact, she said, what do you think will happen to you? We were talking about what's going to happen when she dies. And she asked me, and I said, I think I'll be horribly sad for years, several years. But I was in my mid 60s at the time and healthy, and I felt and have never been alone for more than a few years of my life. I like having a partner. So I said, eventually, I'll probably find someone that's just sort of the way I am. And she went back and forth. She said, yeah, I want you to have another girlfriend. And then she said, no, I don't ever want you to have another girlfriend. And then, yeah, I want you to have a girlfriend. She went back and forth about 5 times, ending with, yeah, I want you to have another girlfriend, which is very meaningful to me because it shows the duality. She didn't want to let go of me. She wanted me forever, but she wanted me to be happy.
Right.
A couple of months after Lynn died, when I was planning her Zoom memorial, this was during COVID, the only memorials were Zoom memorials, I started a conversation, an emailed conversation with an old acquaintance whom I invited to the memorial, hadn't seen her since we were kids. And she told me in like the first emails back and forth, first, her beloved stepmother had recently died, and her husband of 30-something years had just told her he was leaving her. And we started writing a back and forth about grief because I said, wow, you're going through grief too. The loss of the future that you thought you'd have, even though he didn't die, he's left. And she lived about 1,200 miles from here, I should say. So it isn't like she was down the street. We started writing and then talking and then doing some video calls remotely. And at some point, and I don't think this was video, I think it was phone, she suddenly interrupted a conversation about grief and feelings to say, Tony, are you feeling what I'm feeling? Because I've got a big crush on you, which is one of the bravest things that anyone ever said to me. I mean, we hadn't even met. Right. And I had to admit that I did too. And then over the next 2 years, but starting in just a few months, the next time she came through New York, we started to become a couple. And oh my God, you can, on the one hand, how wonderful. And on the other hand, that was so horribly difficult. I was guilt-stricken. I pushed her away at times. I mean, it didn't matter that Lynn had given me permission. This was only a few months. And Lynn's urn with her ashes was still on the mantle, on the shelf in my bedroom. And oh my God. So I write about that a lot in the last part of the book, because the whole question of how's this going to work out? Will it work out? Can I make room for her name is Cordelia in my life, while still I absolutely refuse to let go of Lynn. Lynn is the love of my life, or a love of my life, and I'm not going to let go of her. How could I make that work? And that's what happened over the last 2 years, is the back and forth as I slowly, at least from my side. Now, Cordelia was incredibly helpful. She asked me to talk about Lynn. She didn't want me to forget Lynn or put her aside. One of the things she loved about me was my deep love for Lynn. So that was very, very helpful, but it still took several years.
It was a very interesting part of the book. I thought that, I didn't expect. And it seemed like, there was that horrible struggle and that push pull that you're
Yes.
talking about. Yeah, back and forth and back and forth. And now I understand that you have actually become involved in grief counseling. Is that right?
I have become educated in grief. There's a subtle difference, and I want to be clear. I'm not a counselor. I'm not trained in counseling.
Okay.
But I found it so rewarding when I first started trying to publicize the book, and I was a guest on some podcasts, often podcasts where the theme is grief of the whole podcast for people who are grieving. I found the conversation so interesting. I wanted to know more about grieving. So I took a major course, the kind of thing people take who are therapists, and who are trying to broaden their practice, and I'm now what is called a certified grief educator.
Grief educator.
And I'm available for peer-to-peer, what they call peer-to-peer conversations. I've had just a couple of them. I'm not selling my services for this. I took the course for myself. And so that when I'm having conversations or working or trying to help a friend who is grieving or an acquaintance who is grieving, I feel better able to understand what's going on. I wanted to know if what had happened to me that I'd written in a whole book was common, or if I was like this outlier way in some corner somewhere and no one else's grief is like mine. And of course, it turns out that it was much more common than I had realized. And it was very satisfying to discover that everything I put in my book, when people read it, is a normal path. There's not one path, but my path was normal. So I'm a certified grief educator. If anyone is listening to this who is grieving and would like to talk to me, I'm extremely happy to have conversations.
Please give us your contact information if that's true. Sure.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely true. The best way is you go to my website, which is tonystewartauthor.com, and use the contact me page, which will send me an email. That way I don't broadcast my email address on podcasts, but you can reach me by going to tonystewartauthor.com and click contact us, contact me and fill in the form there. And I will reply. I will respond.
Perfect. I hope they do. Tony, it's been wonderful talking with you. I really thank you for joining us today. And I'd like everyone to make sure you stay tuned for the next episode of Online for Authors. I'm Carole O'Neill. Have a nice day.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.